All right, we are good to go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good to see you. This is the committee meeting for the Assessment and Accountability Committee. And we have off camera Representative Jacques Pedersen and Representative Ruth Wattenberg. And Representative Reed will not be joining us today. So the agenda is now in the chat. Thank you, Darren. We're going to start with check-ins and updates. I guess let's just call it updates. And then if you have something else you want to add, you can add. But can we start with you, President Sutter, with an update from your last meeting with Dr. Grant about fall engagement or the lack thereof or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you so much, Representative Gascoy. So we met with Dr. Grant as part of our state board leadership, OSSE leadership meeting in August. And we asked OSSE about the timeline for report card engagement. And we shared that we would be doing this fall engagement event on Saturday, September 24th. I think we met right around the same time we secured the date and location. So we shared that information with her and with her chief of staff, and noted that the state board wanted this engagement process to be an opportunity for us to co-engage the public rather than doing it sequentially as we had done with the changes to the accountability framework and the ESSA amendment. The reception we got to that request was mixed, and I'll say it was mixed on two fronts. The first, I think I understand fully, which is that OSSE noted we have a lot of work that we are doing in collaboration, including literacy and OSSE's efforts to stand up the literacy task force that council has required them to do, and that they are excited to engage in. And so that work will be getting started this fall and launching later this fall, early this winter. They also noted the social studies standards and the fact that they had secured outside funding to hold a social studies engagement. The date on that is forthcoming, but they expect it to coincide with the release of those standards for public comment, and that is expected this fall. Obviously, we know they're dealing with the community service requirements. So there was a bit of a laundry list of all the things that OSSE wants to work with the state board on early this fall. And so there was a hesitance to say, we're going to dive in on the report card revisions early this fall, because they'd committed that they would do so later this year into early next year. And that was their commitment on their timeline. So they were reluctant to move that up and felt like September might be tough for them. The other thing that they said, which is harder, I think, for our group to navigate, is that because the board had a public vote on the ESSA amendment, and that vote happened in a complicated way with a number of folks voting present, there was a reluctance on the part of the superintendent to feel like engagement collaboratively would be taken in good faith. I don't want to editorialize further than that, but I will say that that was a comment that the superintendent made, that because the board had been divided on their vote on the amendment, there was a hesitancy to see that there could be true collaboration in good faith on a joint engagement. So what we committed to in that meeting was sharing this back with the Assessment and Accountability Committee, with inviting OSSE to the September 24th event to participate. And I think Representative Gascoy, you made this analogy, as we participated in the public engagement OSSE held on the amendment, whereby OSSE would sit and listen, but they would not co-present, and they would not sort of editorialize in the sessions, but they would be there as listeners and observers, and that we committed to inviting them, and they committed to considering our invitation. So that's where that ended. I know that's not perhaps where we would all want it to have ended, but we have another meeting with the superintendent on Monday. So I'd love to hear from the committee if there are ways you'd like us to approach this topic of discussion with the superintendent and her leadership team on Monday.
Thank you, President Sutter. Go ahead, Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, just one quick thing that I hope you will bring back, which is that I do think it's unfortunate that a vote would be taken to mean that we weren't able to collaborate or interested in collaborating in good faith. I mean, people take votes, they have reasons for taking the votes, and that's our job. And also part of our job is to collaborate and work in good faith. So just passing that on.
And for me, if I may, am I to understand, like when they did the report card previously, when we did the iteration we just got rid of with the stars, are we saying that should they bring back to a group of people or stuff like that, we won't have any part in that whatsoever? I remember having a task force, as I said, I served on that task force. And we, the members, I remember having members there and of the state board. Are we saying none of that will happen?
So to your question, Representative Patterson, I do not think that's what we're saying. I think what I heard very clearly in that conversation was our timing for beginning to engage the public on the report card does not align with OSSE's timing. Their timing is later this year. We're starting this in September. The second thing I heard was they think there's value in the state board doing engagement and in OSSE doing engagement, but there is not a certitude that that engagement would happen collaboratively as opposed to independently and sequentially. Does that make sense?
It does, Madam President, and I hear what you're saying. They're kind of going to happen separately. I guess my question is when we get into the nitty gritty of really saying this is what we've heard from the public and stuff like that, and really start talking about what does a report card look like, how it would be redesigned, so to speak, will there be collaboration at that part?
Oh, I have no doubt that there's going to be collaboration between the board and OSSE on what the report card will look like. I think the question, as I understood it, the question from this committee was, is there a way for us to collaborate with OSSE? But I also understood that going into that question, a non-negotiable for the board is that engagement for us begins in September. Like we're beginning it at our engagement event. And OSSE's response was, there's a little hesitance on the part of the superintendent around a truly collaborative engagement process because there's some sense that the board is not all in one place on their willingness to collaborate with OSSE. And two, our timeline starts earlier than theirs, and that makes the logistics of collaboration more difficult. So things I could imagine going back on Monday and saying, in addition to what Representative Wattenberg asked that I convey, that there's, the board is, there are members of the board who are dismayed that the way members voted would be taken as a signal that there was a lack of willingness to collaborate. So I'm happy to communicate that. The other thing that I think might be possible is to say, okay, well, what if we didn't start in September? Or what if we started in September and then we began a collaborative process later this fall? I think there are still ways to make asks here, but I do think that the notion that we would collaborate beginning in September is now, probably not possible. Having OSSE invited in September at the 24th makes perfect sense. But I think we might have to go with something more similar to the way OSSE approached us about the community service hours. Like, could we give them a menu of options of what like our ideal collaboration would be, what a second option for collaboration might be? Because I do think an options memo might be well received if we said, here are the ways we're thinking about this. Are any of these possible? And or is there some X way we could do it?
Is your hand up again, Representative Wattenberger? Okay, so I will go. I guess I want to second what Representative Wattenberg said. I think actually, speaking as one of the people who voted present, a big part of that was around the lack of collaboration, ironically. So I think, one of the things that we said going into that vote was we felt like we could get closer to being on the same page and having a unanimous yes vote if we had at least coordinated more, maybe not at least, what's the word I'm looking for? It's another C word, but it's okay. Collaborated more closely. And so I definitely agree with Representative Wattenberg that the signal we were sending was not that we can't or don't want to collaborate with them. We absolutely do in some ways so that we can have, be on the same page once we get to the vote. I also think, it's the question we should be asking is what best serves the public. And I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but I hear a lot from constituents, I think we all do, that it feels frustrating when two different agencies come and ask similar questions or engage around the same work, and constituents aren't sure, is this the same thing? Am I contributing twice to the same thing? Is this a different thing? And I think the part of the collaboration is just being more efficient, being more, I don't, even just from a research perspective of collecting data, being more, collecting the same data, right? Like asking the same questions. So I think the bigger question is, how do we best serve the public? And I would argue it is through more collaboration. I agree with you, President Sutter, about this idea of like, yeah, we are starting earlier, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't then also do, I'm not saying they can't do, that we would do everything together. I think part of this might be just collaborating on design aspects, or, doesn't mean we have to like always be in the same room together at all with engagement. And I like your idea of the memo. So I will stop there.
Yeah, I think the thing I would say is this. I think different, and I'm trying to step out of my board member space for a second to try to sort of look at this from a third party angle, to say that I think the way we define collaboration as a board is we want to work together so that we have a shared face for the public, that this is a joint effort, that you need give input only once, and that the product we're arriving at is a single product. So let's have a single stream of feedback. And I think that's how we're viewing the intent of collaboration, the reason for collaboration, and the mindset with which we're approaching collaboration. The public's goal here is what we've got in mind. And so how do we streamline this for them and then arrive at a common product? I think another way we can think about collaboration, though, is that the design of that engagement process happens before it is shared with the public. And if that's the mindset with which we're going into what collaboration would look like, I can see how OSSI doesn't necessarily feel like we are approaching collaboration in that truly co-designed mindset, right? Because if we're starting before them and we're getting ahead of their timeline, which they've already made explicit to us, it doesn't feel collaborative. It feels like the board's got our timeline, we've got to act on it. And that's fine. I'm not suggesting that we should kowtow or we should change ours because of that. But I can see how they would not feel like we're truly wanting to collaborate if we're saying, we want to collaborate with you, but also we're doing these things that we need to do on the timeline, we need to do them. And so I don't know how we bridge that gap with them at this moment. I agree that the role of collaboration is to get the public the best and most streamlined approach to this work as possible and to arrive at a common product that takes that input into account. But I do think the process matters, and I can see why OSSI might not feel super collaborated with if we jump start things.
Yeah, I remembered my other C, you reminded me of it, which is communication. And I guess what I would say is, if we could communicate better, that would go a long way, actually. And so this is a good example. President Sutter, what you're saying, like, that makes sense to me, what you're saying. And if that's the case, like if that's truly the case, so that would be good to ask. would they prefer that we not start engagement and actually like communicate with them first around what we're, how we're engaging? This session could be an information session, right? Like it could just be an update to the public of this is where we are now. This is what, what we've done with OSSI, that we voted. This is, the new framework, and here's what's coming up. And I mean, we'd have to decide that as a committee if that's really what we want to do, but we could do that. And so I would suggest actually to my committee chair that that's something that's on the table at this point. We have not finalized our presentation. We have time. And so if that's something that truly is an issue, I put that out as, an offer. And then I also just want to point out, and this is, I don't want this to be taken as like aggressive or anything, but I did look back at the timeline, and this is in OSSI's timeline. So that's why I was surprised when I saw that they're thinking of not doing it in the fall, but like August to January was the timeline for engaging the public around the report card. So that's just something, like, oh, okay, like that's information that's
Yeah.
being changed. So that's all.
Can I just insert, like, I think August to January is still their timeline, but as you well know, their social studies timeline got pushed 3 times. So I think we also have to be mindful that things change and that circumstances change. And so they're still well within that timeline of August to January if they start their engagement in November.
Go ahead, Ruth Wattenberg, Representative Wattenberg.
So I just wanted to say, first of all, I want to start by saying how appreciative I was of what appeared to be a real dialogue with OSSI 2 nights ago. So, I mean, I feel like things are moving in the right direction. And I don't want to suggest otherwise. On this particular timeline, I think it is worth noting that we had really wanted this whole process around the report card to start much earlier, because we were really hoping for a much revised report card this fall, and to have had more engagement with and the ability to talk jointly about both the amendment and the report card. And we're very aware that a lot of people who've been most involved in this on the board are leaving after December. So I just want to say we tried to move this whole thing earlier, and that didn't happen. And here we are. So and I guess what I would say, and I agree with Representative Gasoy about this, is I think it is important to aim for having one engagement where people don't have to feel like they have to come back multiple times to talk about the same thing. We heard that in the focus groups. We've all heard that individually. So I'm sympathetic to sort of revising a little bit how we think about this fall engagement, and then just an encouragement to the next board would be to try to think about, along with OSSI, how to do these things collaboratively, if there really is a genuine interest in doing so on the part of OSSI. And then one other thing I would just note, sort of more for the future than for now, is and Jacques may remember this from the past, one of the issues with engagement that also should be looked at if we're really going to try to do this together and constructively is in the first round on both the ESSA amendment and I think the report card as well. In addition to whatever engagement OSSI did kind of with us and with the public, they did more than a dozen separate meetings with other groups that we weren't invited to. So it was sort of like this double game of, sort of a set of private meetings with some people and then a public engagement. And I would just say it would be great to pull it all together and then really have a sense of everybody working together to try to understand everybody across the city and figure out how to make it work.
So I just want to insert one thing. I think everything you just said, Representative Wattenberg, is exactly why there is a fear that collaboration is not really what we want. Because if I may, you just listed out all the ways in which, while you were pleased with OSSI's conversation the other night, here are all the ways they didn't do the things we wanted them to do. Like, they didn't do it early enough. They've done it wrong in the past. We didn't like the way they did it. I would not be inclined to work with us if our commentary was constantly, here are all the ways they've failed. They need to do better, so they should work with us. I don't know that that makes anyone feel truly like they want to collaborate.
And may
Well,
and may I?
let
I
me,
think I
wait, I just want to finish since that was about my comment. I just want to say, I'm sorry that you feel that way, and I hope that's not how
It's not that I
taken.
feel that way. It's
No,
that
I'm
you
just
said
going to
things.
finish. I'm going to finish my comment, which is I was speaking about a set of practices that precede this administration, and I think
No,
it's
the
important.
timing does not
I'm going to
precede this
finish my
administration.
comment, please. I'm going to finish my comment. And I raised them in what I thought was a constructive way to say that if we want to do this together, here are some things we need to look at. That's exactly what I said. I feel very good about this administration. I feel very good about going
You
forward
just
with it,
criticized their timing.
which is why I complimented what just happened. So thank you.
You just
Okay.
criticized their timing this year.
and so if
But
if
I
I
would
may,
like to just, sorry,
If-
my code. Can we not interrupt each other? I think just as like.
I
the-
would love that, but I've been interrupted for 3 years.
Okay, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Okay, like we're in this meeting right now and you did just interrupt like 3 times. Let's
Yes,
not.
I did.
Okay, all
may
right,
um,
moving on.
and not
I
trying
think
to.
we also just not interpret other people's, I mean,
I'm not interpreting. I was repeating exactly what was said.
it's not
There was
how
a criticism of the timeline. There was a criticism of acts past, and there is that nonetheless a question. And I'm being asked to present it, which is why I'm raising it. I'm being asked to go back to the superintendent and request collaboration while my colleagues are continually critiquing the way in which the work happens. It's a difficult position to be placed in, to navigate asking for things to be different while also watching colleagues continually critique the work that happens. I don't know how to bridge that gap. I'm working on it. I'm asking for, I think a memo might help. I'm doing my best to be the go-between here, but it's very hard when the way in which my colleagues are speaking about the agency is being taken by the agency as strong criticism.
we'll come back to that.
I do
Representative
have my hand,
Patterson.
hand up, ma'am. And thank you. I appreciate always, even when it's heated, the conversation. So I just want to acknowledge that. But I wanted to circle back to what you said, Madam Vice Chair, of this committee, is that I think if there's a way that we can move our timeline so that we can work together, I'm open to that. I think that was a question that you asked very on, if there needs to be some adjustment to our timeline, because I think it's important that we do not send mixed messages to our communities and constituents that we serve, and that we do work as much as possible collaboratively together on something that's very important to parents, to students, to principals and teachers about how this is going to happen and how it's rolled out. I think it's important that we always, as much as possible, show people that we are united on how we want to serve as much as we possibly can. I think that's been kind of broken, and I know that both sides have their individual feelings as far as us as a committee and OSSI as how the vote went down. But I think at the end of the day, we both have the same goals. And I think if we can adjust our timeline in some manner, that we can work collaborative together. Because I do see OSSI's point of view, and I also see the committee's point of view of how they feel like we could do this better. So I'm with that, Madam Vice Chair, Co-Chair, on this, as far as if we need to move a timeline that better fits OSSI's timeline so that we can be a little bit more as opposed to dictating the timeline. So I do understand that they feel like because we're starting now that we may be dictating, and we definitely do not want to do that. We want to be as collaborative. And if it's allowable, if we can fit the schedule to adjust the schedule, then I'm for adjusting it so we can do things together.
Thank you, Representative Patterson. We do have a lot on the agenda, and I'm realizing we're taking a lot of time, and this is important. So I'm glad we are. I guess I would just say that, again, in the spirit of communication isn't always patting on the back, right? The communication is honest and constructive, hopefully. And I think, if it feels like this is not a message, I think the message that we're hoping to convey is, first of all, the question about our fall engagement. That's very specific and concrete, right? Is there an issue with the fact that we're starting with engagement now? Does that impact the possibility of future collaboration? And if so, we're happy to adjust that. So I think that's the first message. I think we also want to send the message about just, what's best for the public, what serves public best. And what we have found is that frustration around sort of the parallel play. And I think those are the two main issues, right? Does that work? And also your idea about the memo and maybe floating that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a memo of ideas that you'd like us to bring, we can do that. The meeting is Monday at 2. We typically send our agenda this afternoon, but we can send materials earlier, like on Monday, and that would be fine. We had an interview Monday morning, so Monday's a busy day.
Yeah. If we're not able to, I mean, we can try to have a memo of options, but what about just floating it as an idea and seeing how it's taken and then saying we'll send it Friday?
I can certainly ask that. I will say my concern on this is timing. Our engagement is September 24th. I want to make sure you all know that you have set the materials you need, anything translated that you need in order for the fall SBOE engagement to go off well.
Yeah.
So just be mindful that we may not get a response back from OSSI immediately on any sort of memo. The superintendent tends not to make decisions in meetings. She'd prefer to consider it and then get back to us. So I do think floating something on Monday is fine. But if we're telling her we're going to send a memo, I think we'll float an idea, send a memo, and still have a pause before we get a response.
Yeah, I imagine that's true regardless, but okay. So maybe what would be helpful is to float it. I mean, we can probably have a draft of something. It won't be exhaustive. It won't be like a long laundry list. So, but even so, even if we don't get a response, you'll sort of get a sense maybe. So that will be helpful.
Yep.
Representative Patterson, is that a new hand?
No, ma'am, it's not. I'll lower that hand. Thank you.
I just muted myself. No problem. Okay, unless there's any last comments, questions about this, I'm going to propose we move on to the next item, which is, Darren, did you want to give an update on the NASB session that was accepted?
Absolutely. I'll give a truncated version of this, but we are I'm just trying to pull it up. For the 2022 annual conference, our session titled Exploring Inclusion of School Climate Metrics in the DC Accountability System has been accepted. And so Ruth, Emily, and I will be presenting on this. And just a few quick points to this. The objectives would be to explain at least 2 reasons why school climate is an important metric to consider for inclusion in state accountability systems, describe how at least 2 states have embedded school climate metrics into their accountability systems, and describe approaches state boards can take to explore options for including school climate metrics into their own state accountability system. And so we are slated for 75 minutes on October 28th to speak at the NASB conference. I think the next steps are to put together more fully this presentation. A lot of the pieces are there, I think, but just collaborating with the committee on this over the next several weeks to put something together. Will be exciting, and I think also helpful for the state board as well to continue to think through well-rounded education. Oh, I'm sorry, well-rounded school climate.
Got it. Any thoughts or questions on this? Thank you, Darren. And thank you for helping to put this together, the proposal and submitting and all of that. It's exciting.
And I can, after this, I can reshare out the proposal that we shared with NASB that was accepted.
Okay, yeah. And so that is October 27th and 28th, I think, we'll be going to Phoenix. So that's exciting. If there's no other comments or questions, I think we can move on.
Well, I'm sorry, really quickly. I just wanted to confirm with Ruth. Ruth, you'll be able to make it to the conference. Is that correct?
Yes. Also, are we going through a draft of the presentation here? Is that what I understood? Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's for the, yeah, sorry.
I can quickly put
Just
something
yet.
together.
It just got accepted a few days ago. So we're still, yeah, it hasn't been born yet. Okay, so our fall engagement session, circling back. So Darren is going to share some of the slides with us, but I'm wondering now following our last conversation, maybe we should, let's think about this in two ways. So the first frame that we were, thinking about this through was both, or the purpose was to share information, but also then to gather input. So I think we can go over this draft, knowing that we might change this to be just an information session. So just kind of keeping that in mind as we look at these slides. Because I think what I was hoping was to mainly look at the engagement slides. And I think we can still do that, even if we don't use them at this session, we can think about them for down the road. Yeah, Ruth, go ahead.
So I think it's not okay to have just an information session. We are a board, we want to interact with people. But so part of what I'm thinking, and we can just think about this as we look at the slides, is that maybe we're asking people for input on the presentation. Like this isn't the formal engagement, but thanks for being here. These are what we think is important. This is what we were going to raise when engagement time comes. What do you think? And it could help alter the way we present in the future, the way we think of the options and so on. That might be a way to both have interaction and not step on future toes.
Yeah, or, I guess depending on what we hear back from President Sutter after the meeting on Monday, if we know we're going to be collaborating more with us, we can kind of frame it as we're collecting your input on the presentation so that then we can share that with, we would anyway, I guess we can say that anyway, what has been useful, what you would want to know more on. So what I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying is we're as much or primarily gathering input on whether the presentation, the session is successful and actually is truly informative and engaging, right?
Raising the right issues, I guess, but we can talk about it as we go through. It's sort of a frame for thinking about how it does go through.
President Sutter.
Yeah, I'm mindful of two things. One, that the goal of our fall engagement session is for the board to engage with the public. So I share Representative Wattenberg's view that it shouldn't just be a voice out from the board to the public, but a way for them to engage. I'm also mindful that I don't know what the superintendent and her team will say about true collaboration. And I hope we're realistic about what we think is possible. And I don't say that in any sort of spirit of personal animus, right? That like, well, OSSI may not want to engage with us because they don't appreciate the way the board voted. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm mindful of is that OSSI is a state education agency and we're elected officials. We have different roles when it comes to the public, and we have different purposes often in the way we engage the public. So I am eager to see the presentation that we've drafted, but I want to think about, is it worth us sacrificing a chance to get input from the public in order to take a chance that we might have a fully collaborative engagement with OSSI? I don't have a good risk assessment here, but I am mindful that we might be giving up a chance to get input from the public at a major event.
Okay, all right, well, why don't, yeah. All right, well, let's go through the slides and just take them as they are now, and then we can go from there. Does that sound good? Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen and yeah, I'll go through these. Again, this is a draft that I'll share after the meeting in SharePoint, so folks can go in and make further edits to it. So this is very high level. Another caveat is I'm gonna go quickly through OSSI's, like any information around OSSI or like OSSI's engagements. I'll go through those just because they haven't been fully vetted yet, and so since this is public facing, I don't want to get anything wrong here. So let me just share my screen really quickly. Okay, can everyone see this? Great. All right, so just especially based on what we've been discussing at this committee meeting, just keeping all of this in mind, I'm happy to say that, like, this does actually not only capture participant feedback, like that's the one of two goals for this, but it also reflects back on past feedback that we past state board outreach and collecting feedback and how that feedback was used. And so it's just kind of the first half setting the frame and providing enough context to then collect meaningful participant feedback towards the end. And so sharing out what maybe the evolution of the DC school report card, what it looks like now, some of their intentions and commitments, and then getting feedback on what it looks like now and what other states' report cards look like. So I'm going to dive right into that, but I wanted to sort of frame what these slides are going to look like. So the overview is introduce the State Board Assessment and Accountability Committee work, contextualizing the STAR framework and the DC school report card, receive meaningful participant feedback, and then allowing for questions and answers.
Can I just ask you, is it more helpful if we let you go all the way through and just comment or ask questions after? Should we ask and make comments as you go? What's easier for you?
I think let me go through this first, and then at the end,
Okay.
you can ask questions.
So members, just take notes on what you want to comment on as we go. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, and
Yep.
again, this is a very high level draft. I will share this out after the meeting, and then use the comments to then create the materials for feedback. So any handouts, anything that we get.
Sounds good.
So going to the next slide, how does the state board fit into assessment and accountability in DC? Just explaining what the state board does, including voting on advocating for policies related to state board assessment and accountability of schools. The assessment and accountability, what they do, and we would go over some of the items that the committee goes over. Then moving to outreach and accomplishments. So going over the principal survey, teacher survey, family survey, how many people were reached out to, the 2021 fall engagement, public witness testimony from the past, as well as just hearing from different experts, and then going over some of the resolutions for this. I don't know what's up with that hanging. I don't know what's up with that. All right. And then going over just a quick timeline from last year on engagement, outreach and engagement, followed by where we're at right now. So starting with January 2022, once SR 22-1 was voted on, where we're at right now. And again, I would love to get feedback on this once I share this out with everyone. But again, these are sort of the cadence of the slides. And again, feedback on the cadence of the slides would be great too. So moving along, purposes of the DC school report card versus the STAR framework, kind of going over what is in the DC school report card, differentiating that with the STAR framework and annual meaningful differentiation, like what that means, what's federally required to be in a report card. And again, just using this to just give enough information to people to then get feedback from them on what's required, as well as what the difference is between the STAR framework and the report card. I share OSSI's timeline for the report cards, and note that this is a tentative timeline. Then go into the DC school report card, sort of what the current one looks like, or just an idea of it. What we recommend, what SR 22-1 recommends, and then just highlighting what really applies to the report card aspects of it. So no summative rating, rate the indicators, so on and so forth. As your report card commitments and intentions. These are some of the things that OSSI, well, I want to skip over this because again, that's something that needs to be vetted, but that just some of those high level areas. The previous report card, what it looked like, examples of other states' report cards, and then features to sort of look out for and then think through, static versus dynamic report cards, and just mentioning OSSI moving towards dynamic report cards and explaining what that is. Options to compare other schools by performance and overall rating. Ratings provide clear information on how they are formulated. So when you hover over, if there is a rating or an index rating, have a hover over something that would explain what a school rating is and how it's formulated, and then providing examples of other states' school report cards. I only did 3. And in your feedback, if there's something you have in mind, just letting me know what maybe 4th or 5th, if we should have a 4th or 5th, what those should look like. But I wanted to leave that open and kind of be flexible around that. And then tell us what you think based on the examples that you see in other states' report cards. We would be interested to know your thoughts on, and this is in line as far as I could tell what OSSI was also trying to get at was, and this is very close language around OSSI's engagement with the public. When displaying metric data, what information do you feel is important to help provide additional context to school performance? What suggestions or changes do you have for the current DC school report card? And what should OSSI consider to make displaying data and school information easy to understand and navigate for DC residents? And I think this last one might be the crux of a lot of this, is just making it accessible to as many people as possible in the district. And this, I think, might be done best in small groups. And so just sharing out handouts that small groups can react to, and then like answer these 3 questions, discuss the 3 questions, and then share those out with presenters. And then next steps, engaging with OSSI and the state board, how members, that maybe I could make this a little bit more clear, but how participants can engage with OSSI and the state board, and then going over these items, and then there would be a Q&A. So, oh, I stopped sharing my screen. I could share it again. But that was sort of the gist of it. And so any reactions or any questions about this?
Really? Come on, folks. I have some, but I'll wait. Yeah. Go ahead, Ruth.
Okay, well, thank you, Darren. A couple of things. One, on what the committee does. I would just note that along with those other roles, we advise the board, which in turn advises OSSI about relevant issues that we have a role in for on the report card in particular, and on the accountability framework. In a way that's maybe less true of other committees. We are actually advising on things that we have a role in approving. Second, on the list of documents.
Wait, Ruth, I just want to make sure. So
Okay.
is this the right slide? Like, is this the slide you're talking about? Because I'm not sure I know what you mean.
No,
Can I repeat that back to you, Ruth? I think this is the slide because it says this is what the committee does.
no, well,
Which slide are you thinking of? What did it have on it?
can you go one before and one after? I mean, maybe it is, I can't.
This is the session overview, then
Okay.
what the state board does and what the committee does.
Yeah, I guess so. It is. I guess it is that one then.
And so I see what you're saying. It's not only the committee itself helps advise the full board.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
the board, that the board itself has a role in approving these things, and the committee is kind of the initial workhorse on that.
Yes,
Bring
no,
it
that
to the
makes
board.
sense. I'm making a note to add that to the slide.
On your list of documents, I would add the resolution that was adopted in, I think it was October 2020, the interim report. And I say that partly because it started the process, but also it contains a lot of the earlier research, which wasn't necessarily brought back into subsequent resolutions. I can't remember. So I think that would be important to include. And then the last one, and the most substantive, is when you go through the
Hold on,
recommend.
Ruth,
Okay.
hold on, because I see Darren's capturing this. I just
Okay.
want to make sure that it gets captured.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I'm sorry about that.
No
Okay.
worries. No, takes a minute. All right, you good?
And all of these are links, so we could maybe have these slides digitally available.
Yeah.
So that people can actually click the links and get access to the survey reports, the resolutions, and so on. Okay.
Yeah, I think mainly we want to convey that a lot was done and you can access this. I think we can't show everything. And but if folks are interested, here's where they can find it. Go ahead, Ruth, sorry.
Then when you get into sort of the options for the report card, and you have the state examples, those state examples were explicitly picked to show a wide range of different ways states did it. Since then, we've adopted a resolution unanimously that has a particular approach to this. So I would really recommend that instead of having that particular set of slides, which really sort of takes us back, and we can include them. I'm not saying you have to like censor them or anything, but I think the more important point is that we want to convey, here's what the board proposed, use the example that we have, use some examples of other states that do those kinds of things in different ways. How to, so that's what I would recommend. And I think that is really important.
Yeah, no,
We had
that was
a set of recommendations. We worked hard on them. They were unanimous. Here's what they were. And here's how other states have done similar things insofar as they have. Some of them maybe were first.
So let me just repeat that back to you and make sure I kind of look, I would look for examples of other state report cards that reflect the recommendations from the state board, and sort of highlight those in the slides.
Well, that's a piece of it, but also highlight our recommendations. This is what we're proposing for the,
Our
the-
dev-
So there's a slide here on the recommendations, and I highlight what we're calling, what the state board voted on and called for.
I think what Ruth
well,
is
that's,
talking about is the actual visual, right, Ruth?
yeah. And this is good, Darren, I had missed it, and it's, and I'm glad you have it, and it's a mouthful. So yeah, the
Yes.
visual is really important in this, and we may want to pick a couple of these to focus in on to get people's reactions on.
Yes, yeah, so. I'm gonna have, let me, I'll circle back on that, and I'll make a note of this in a follow-up email of with these slides, asking for feedback, but also just making sure that those slides are reflect, those examples reflect the recommendations, and just sort of helping people visualize what the state board recommended. And if that is, if the participants are in agreement with that, or if they have another take on it, but during the feedback part of this, getting others' thoughts. So it'd be sharing the state board's recommendations, which were informed by expert and public feedback, and then getting further feedback in the session. I feel like I was just all over the map with that. Sorry. I'm more like talking out, like thinking and talking out loud, but
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what this is for.
okay. But I see what you're saying, Ruth. So let me take a stab at it. I'll do a follow-up email offline with the committee and try to get that right.
Yeah, I think we can kind of talk through it if you want. Again, today, like I said, I have time. But also, I mean, are you done, Ruth? Because I actually
I'm done.
was thinking something similar about those 3 examples. I couldn't look at them carefully to see what they were, but I had a similar thought just of like, I don't think we are, one of the things I think is important, and I'm not sure if we can convey it, I'm hoping we can convey it succinctly, is just a lot of this is our time to talk about display. And in particular, you know, I think the question that Aussie's asked, we're all asking is, what do we do with the score that we get from the formula, right? And so I definitely think, I agree with Ruth, we should show our example that was sort of a conglomerate of some of these, that shows how you can display information without a score. You can also show how other states do it without us, you know, making it look like it is a indication of school quality. I think that is I think we want to be explicit about why that's something we recommended. Because that is what it's what led to you know, schools being labeled in a certain way, and that's what I think we all agreed the stars were problematic, right? So
And just, oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Emily.
No, that's okay. I also had but go ahead and ask a question, because I had a small thing on another slide. That's not-
Just a quick question. So the current, this is the past DC school report card that showed the rating. Currently, it does not show the rating. I mean, with the pandemic, everything going on, they've since taken that off. They've touched on having some form of a possible score, but not like a star rating. But the current, there's nothing to point to the current report card where there is like an overall score or anything like that
On our slides, you mean?
on our slides.
We could show that. That was another thought I had, was we have a slide that kind of breaks down yeah, isn't this it?
This is the current report card, but it's not, it's not dynamic. It's sort of just a PDF, but like they right now have PDFs of it. So they're working on, in their revision, having actual
Making it interactive.
making, yeah, so this is just sort of,
Oh, but we can't show
The
that, but we can
placeholder.
explain that, right? Yeah.
so by
mean-
showing this, there is no rating available.
Right. And so I think we have to explain, though, that going forward, the reason there's no rating was not a choice. It was because, you know, there was nothing to share, right?
Mhm.
And so going forward, what should we do? That is the question. And I think that's one of the primary points we are collecting input on, right? Is display and content.
Yeah.
So, okay, but going back to slide 2, this is really nitty gritty. But just, I think on slide 2, where you overview the purpose that we want to say, can you go back to slide 2?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's okay. Number 3, receive meaningful participant feedback. Can we say on display and content of the report card? Keeps us focused, and I think then it just makes it, you know, really clear for them as well.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that was all for me. I see President Sutter's hand.
Thanks, Representative Gassoy. My question, I think the slides are great. I appreciate the feedback that both Representative Wattenberg and Representative Gassoy are putting in. I think this all strengthens the presentation. I guess my question is this, and it goes back a little bit to preparing for my conversation on Monday with Aussie. As I listen, we have clear goals to engage the public and hear what the public has to say, 100%. But we also have clear goals to make sure the public knows what we have recommended as a board and to share why we think those recommendations are the right course of action for Aussie to take. I can imagine that if we stick with that, which I understand why we are, and I think it's the right way for the board to approach engagement, it may mean that we need to engage the public separately from Aussie's engagement of the public. So hear me out for a second. I think Aussie will engage the public and say, here's the current report card, here are the changes to the ESSA amendment that were made, here are the ways in which Aussie could display information. I imagine that Aussie may take one of the our recommendation, our visual, as one of their suggestions. But I suspect that Aussie will also want to offer other suggestions to the public, ones that mirror something more like what they have now with the new summative score in place of where there used to be a rating, and other options as well as maybe like a design your own thing. So I want to just voice over that, like, I see why we are doing it this way, and I think it is aligned with how we have done all of our recommendations. It's aligned with our resolution. It's aligned with all the work that we've done as a board. It may, however, make it difficult for Aussie to adopt this as its mode of engagement. So a question I have to the committee is there a sense that this is the right way for the engagement to happen? And if it meant we engage the public, Aussie engages the public, there's some effort to synthesize, that would be preferable, versus what if we had to abandon this approach and simply say our recommendation is one way it could be visually presented, and then here are 4 or 5 other options that Aussie may want to put forward. What are your reactions to that sort of possible scenario?
Yeah, I really appreciate that framing. Actually, that is helpful. And I guess it makes me wonder if maybe what we either convey or ask, I'm still thinking through it, but is, what I think both you and Ruth have said, which is we have a different purpose, right? And that's very true and important. And I think it's understood between our agencies to some extent. I don't think the public knows that, right? And I'm wondering if that's something we need to explain, going back to this issue of like parallel play. We don't want it to come across as parallel play. So if we are both presenting on the same thing but differently, maybe that's what we need to make explicit. So anyway, just putting that out there. I see your hand, Ruth.
So I guess I think, and I think President Sutter put it well, this is kind of what we have to do. I mean, we need to report back about what we did. We need to report back about what we found. We need to report back about what we unanimously adopted, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that is important, and we're sort of obliged to do that. And excited to do it also, because it was a very big engagement for us, and et cetera. Again, I think there's, but I don't think that precludes having a joint engagement with OSSI that's more on their timeline. And I think that is subject to some discussion. I would think that if there is a joint timeline, if we were to jointly present something, part of it would be the board's work, but part of it would be OSSI, and part of the collaboration is trying to figure out how to do a useful, constructive engagement around that. And it's not immediately clear to me how that works or what it looks like, but I think it's not so uncommon. And that is, so I would say this is appropriate for now. We should also explain where we are with OSSI, be very clear about that. Be clear about OSSI's role in this, and its role ultimately is the deciders. Give them credit for that, and hope that we can still put together something with OSSI at the moment that works for them, where the two groups are together presenting to the same audiences and generating feedback so that everybody can sort of decide how to go forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, Representative Wattenberg. I am a little bit, I guess my thinking is maybe a step ahead of that, which is on the logistics of it. What does that mean? What does that mean for this presentation? What does that mean for how we approach the conversation with OSSI about collaboration versus some sort of sequential for now and collaboration on the back end? Again, I think getting some options out on paper will be helpful to that conversation. But I do think there's I could imagine a world in which we say, this is where the board has landed, and this is the board's recommended approach to presentation. These are the questions the board would like to solicit from the public about refining this final board recommendation to OSSI. And maybe that's a way to approach this fall, which is the board is thinking that this is our best thinking to date on how we would present the information in the new ESSA amendment to the public, as well as the information that goes beyond the ESSA amendment that matters greatly to the people of DC. So things like our teacher data, things like other information we have about school programs and offerings. And this is how the board recommends it. But these are the questions the board has for the public, because we are refining a recommendation we want to make to OSSI. And then OSSI might have engagement that says, we've received this recommendation from the board. Here, in addition to that, which we are considering, here are some other options we are considering. I don't know if that's how it will go, but I could imagine that might be one approach folks might take.
I think that makes sense. And I guess I would have to look at the slide again, Darren, but we would want to make the relationship between the state board and OSSI really clear, like that why we're making recommendations to them, what our statutory role is in relationship to OSSI. I think that would be really helpful to people in general. And obviously very relevant in this situation. So I think that helps to bring clarity if assuming we are going ahead with the presentation as it's, drafted now. Any other thoughts, Ruth?
Actually, I just have one more, and this may not work for Aussie, but it seems to me that one way to think about this is we did this very extensive outreach research, et cetera, et cetera. We came up with a set of recommendations, and I'm now talking beyond, and then we're going to do another engagement around it. Then we're doing something joint with Aussie. And, I can see a world as kind of the world I would like, where the Aussie role, we're thinking of our different roles is, okay, we've got the public input, we've got the input from the elected leaders, and it's pretty strong in this case. Here, as the agency, as the people with greater technical expertise, as the people who understand the logistics, as the people who understand the needs of the people running the show, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here are the concerns we have, alternative options, questions, both to the board and the public. So that, in other words, it's the next part of a genuinely constructive conversation on this. Now, that may feel to them too much like they're ceding too much to us, but I think it could be a very constructive way to view this. And again, sort of puts our relationship in a place where I think it would be good. That's it.
Coordinated. That's another C. I think coordinated is a good idea if we're not, yeah. So maybe collaboration is not actually as, I was going to say realistic, but maybe it's not even like, it's not realistic because, as you've pointed out, both of you, we have different roles. So coordinated would be fabulous, I think. And so maybe it is really the communication about what that might look like, right? Like, how do we become more coordinated? And I think it is about, if we're framing this as you just suggested, President Sutter, that we're refining our recommendations with public input, then what happens next? Well, and if we could tell them that, I think that's maybe what we're asking Aussie. If we can, because again, bottom line, what's best for the public, right? And what's best then for both our agencies in terms of getting feedback, right? Like that's useful and meaningful. And I think if we can be more coordinated and actually explain how we work together with Aussie, why we're doing this, and then why they're going to follow up, how they're going to follow up. It doesn't have to be obviously exact because they may not know yet, but just generally, at least some people will know, we can I think that brings a lot more clarity to this process. And also I agree, I think it's more realistic probably in the end.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I feel like we've landed this conversation in a place where I know how to go into Monday better. Because I also think, for what it's worth, it sets us up in a way that is consistent with how we position ourselves to the public. Like, we are the voice of the public on public education. So we are going to the public to say, here's our best thinking based on all the research and all the engagement we've done so far. But now we've got another big audience of the public at this event. Tell us what else we need to be doing to refine our best thinking on this, so that we make the recommendation to OSSI, the state agency, that best reflects the views of the public as we have collected them from folks. So I think that makes sense. So I think, to just get myself clear, on Monday, I want to be able to share with OSSI, here's our latest thinking on how we're approaching September. Our goal with OSSI is to be coordinated in our engagement on the report card. And to do that, it would be helpful to share what we plan to do in September, what we would like to see going forward, which is an opportunity to communicate clearly. And I'm using all of our good C's to communicate clearly about the work, to find opportunities to collaborate at the various stages of the engagement, and to make sure that our approaches are coordinated. We're seeking to refine our recommendation with further input from the public. And then we'd like to be able to make sure that that recommendation is part of OSSI's engagement going forward, and that we can communicate to the public when and where they can learn more about OSSE's efforts to engage the public this fall, and whether we'll be involved with those.
That sounds great.
Excellent.
Yay. Productive.
I love the productive struggle.
I'm
I'm still here, but I'm going off camera. My best friend is getting married in Baltimore this afternoon, so I'm just going to pack my bag while I listen to the rest of the conversation.
Okay, and I am just wondering, I am looking at the time. We have 2 more items, and they are kind of items to be discussed further, I guess. But the well-rounded education research update was just thinking, I'm trying to get a sense of what next steps are in terms of getting things rolling. And I think one of the things we definitely need to do is decide, what the design is going to be, what we're, well, first of all, what's our objective? What are we trying to find out about well-rounded education? I did have a conversation with Scott Abbott, who I've talked with, periodically about what's going on in schools, with social studies, and some of the, I was just curious what he would find useful. I think it would be helpful to, okay, and I'll just say, sorry, I'll finish that thought. His sense was it would be helpful to do a deeper dive with fewer, knowing that we don't have a big budget, that even if it's just doing a deeper dive with a few schools and being able to actually have focus groups and interviews with students and teachers and maybe school leaders to hear what's actually happening in schools, that would be really helpful, because we know that even if something's on the schedule, there's a lot of complication that happens around, do kids get pulled out? Do, some schools can't seem to find certified teachers in that, if in the high school. So I guess what we need to decide as a committee is, what do we want to find out? What grade bands do we want to survey in whatever way we do it? And what's a realistic design based on the funding, the capacity, all of that, the timeline. So I don't know those things, and I think we need staff help, at least on obviously the logistics part, the funding and the timeline. I think that some of the committee members need to, or we all should weigh in on what makes most sense in terms of knowing enough to design this, right, and put together a proposal. So one thought I had was I spoke with Scott kind of informally. I think we could maybe try to talk to some of the other folks at DCPS, maybe I can't remember her name right now, head of arts, maybe head of science, right? Maybe Corey, if they're willing to talk to us, just to hear their thoughts, but also maybe try to talk to some teachers. I'm not sure. What are thoughts on this? Like how we figure this out? The other thing I just want to say is I did go back and look at the old TMP proposal for research on standards that this committee took up, or the Well-Rounded Education Committee took up before pandemic. And actually the design could work for this. So that's just something I'll share with the committee to get your thoughts on that. But basically, in a nutshell, it was going into they chose 8 schools that would participate. They would do some observation. They would do some interviews and some focus groups. And that was looking at standards, but I could imagine that this could work as well if we're looking at sort of, which students are getting, their time in a class. I don't know. That's what we'd have to define, what we're measuring. And then also there's 2 researchers that already did research on this, I think students of color access to music education, so it's very specific in DC. And then there's 2 researchers from University of North Carolina that Scott recommended that did work on more national work on access to social studies. So another thought is to have them come talk to our committee about, design and challenges and what makes sense for our context. Okay, that was a lot. Sorry. Thoughts, questions? Ruth, is
So
your,
did-
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there. Well, it wasn't, but I was going to talk. Okay. So, first, the easy, issue is what are we trying to learn? To me, it really is about elementary. That is the grade level where the social studies and science and the arts get lost. I mean, in DC, you have a lot of requirements in those areas once you hit middle school and high school. So I think it's really about elementary school, to some extent about middle school, but really about elementary school. So that's the first thing. And what I'm really interested in knowing, and I think what we're all interested in knowing, is the extent to which in those grades, kids are really getting exposure to and sort of systematic instruction in social studies, science, and the arts. How much, how good is it always harder? That's sort of what I'm very interested in. I think it would be great in general to be able to look at the lessons that were, samples of the curriculum, the lessons that were being taught. I think that was part of the old
It was.
research proposal, so I would revisit that. And also amount of time, I think, is really critical. And I would add, which I think was part of the original proposal, but I don't remember, is just this idea of the systematic, the sequential, that it's not just, oh, today we're reading, some novel or whatever, and it happens to include information about the geography of the Great Plains, right? Or, the history of Selma, or whatever it is. In other words, it's not just about that you've exposed somebody to it and you've read it in a book, but the extent to which it's connected to other things. There's a sequentialness to it. There's a purpose to it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The one other research person, entity I'd put in there either to conduct the research, but also just to inform us, and maybe it would be interesting to have them come, is the folks at Hopkins, who really are, as much as anybody that I know, really looking at social studies and science. I don't know if they're doing the arts across the curriculum, across the country, and really trying to chart it out and understand what's going on and be able to contextualize what any given place is doing relative to what others are doing and to their sense of sequence. So that's that. And then the third thing I just want to raise is, realistically, it's September, and the board is going to be shifting as of January. So what are we doing? I mean, are we trying to commission this before we leave? I don't necessarily think that's a wrong idea. But is that what we plan to do? Do we want to? And before I go on, I want to say, I actually think there's a good argument for that, because it is so hard to pull together, and the next people coming in would take another year to sort of figure it out. So actually, I was going to raise this more seriously, but now I actually sort of think it's a way of kind of pulling together the knowledge that we've had that's about to leave the board. So I'm probably for it, but I did want to raise that that's sort of an issue. The other thing, just for the context on this, for anybody listening, the report that Representative Gasser was talking about, is there was a serious effort to pull together a research effort around well-rounded education. It was all really set to go. We had the proposal, we had the contract, we had everything, and then there was a pandemic, so it didn't happen. And so that's what I think.
Right. Okay, sorry, I see your hand, President Sutter.
Yeah, two quick thoughts. One, I think two things I hope we can figure out how to frame in any approach to research is making sure that we don't miss interdisciplinary efforts that are not what Representative Wattenberg cautioned against, which I think is an appropriate caution. Like, reading a book about westward expansion does not necessarily mean social studies is included. But there are a lot of, and I think Natalie Wexler profiled one school in DC that actually has an integrated humanities curriculum. Center City Public Charter School uses core knowledge as their joint ELA social studies curriculum. So finding a way to make sure we get the nuance of approaches that are deeply integrated, cross-curricular, versus those that are fluff, if you will, efforts to say like, well, we talked about that thing, so that counts. Because I think there's a few schools doing it that way, including the project-based learning schools. So like our expeditionary learning schools, et cetera. Second thing is Hopkins, I wholeheartedly agree. And I really admire the work that Dr. Steiner and his crew are doing, but they are working with DCPS on a curriculum audit. And so we have attempted to talk to them twice about social studies, and they have demurred because they were in the middle of that work. So I think we just might want to figure out if there's anyone as our like second hope in case that contract is still ongoing and they're not yet able to share with us, if there's anyone else who might be on that list. But otherwise, I concur with everything Representative Wattenberg said. I'll note too, David Alpert had a thread on Twitter the other day about something kind of unrelated, but he mentioned that there's also stuff on paper that doesn't materialize in reality, like families who use the lottery system to apply for a school that had music education, but in between the lottery timeline and now things were shifted in the school schedule. And so music education is no longer featuring as prominently. So I think that getting into schools to do this qualitative research in person is going to be really important so that we can see what is said on paper, contrast it with what happens in person, and highlight those nuances to the public.
Yeah, I see your hand. I just want to jump in real quick and say, I agree with all of that. That all makes a lot of sense. And in fact, I think being able to tease out the, high quality work that's being done in these areas we're looking at, as opposed to where it's just on paper that it's interdisciplinary, is one of the main focuses, right? Like that's one of the main purposes of this. And I forgot one thing I just wanted to propose or put out there is, another way of doing this could be to do this would be an initial study to find schools that are doing it well. Like you pointed out, President Sutter, we know at least one, right? That was doing it well at some point. Could this be case studies? Could it be like profiles of what this could look like? So that's another purpose, would be to highlight what this looks like in schools that are really doing it, right? The interdisciplinary thing, that could be very helpful. Or it could be initial research the way the state board did for teacher retention, where it's sort of just doing a state of what's, figuring out what the main challenges are, and then kind of going from there. This is ongoing research, but I guess that would have to be seen. So, and I think, ideally, Ruth, just to your point of when we do this, we did put off getting our funding until October, so I'm just wondering if we did want to get this started before January, is that possible? Like, can we submit a proposal before October? Would we have to do that, Darren? So you don't have to answer now if you don't know, but those are just kind of questions I have of like, when would we have to get a proposal out? If we hope to do this, get it started before January. Ruth, go ahead.
So a couple of things, just going back to somebody said, I forget if it was Representative Sutter or guest, so getting into the schools is good. I'm totally for it if that works out. But I also think, talking to teachers about what's actually going on can be a very, very helpful generally, but almost a surrogate for that, for an initial report, so that you can hear from teachers, well, what was your plan to make sure that you covered the social studies, science, and the art? What actually happened? How did the schedules shift? And I think one of the things that, again, I think we put it in the original proposal was to actually look at and collect the schedules from either these case study schools or from all schools, just to get a sense of what was supposed to happen. And to this question on the timeline, as I'm thinking about this, I really do think it would be great to get something moving before we leave. And I think it should be approved by the people who are staying. So it's not just, those of us who are here, but I would recommend really going back to that initial proposal, which was done. It was good. It was on its way, and just sort of tweak it, because I think it was pretty good. I think we can add in some of the things we just talked about, and then put it out there, in which case I think, we can totally do that on a pretty quick timeline, but I leave it to Darren to talk about exactly the timeline on that.
Can I clarify, Ruth, are you talking about the TMP study, which was on standards? Or are you talking about, there was a well-rounded education study we were teeing up, but I actually did not love the design of that one. Like I felt like it wasn't as far along, right? Like we didn't have a vendor. I'm not sure it was really getting at what we wanted, but I'm not sure. So we should look at that as well.
Yeah, I may be conflating the two and taking the things that I like from both of them and imagining they were both in one proposal. But so yeah, we should look, but it may be that the standards one is easy to
Transfer, yeah.
to amend, because I think the main thing that was in it was the structure of it, which I still think would be the right thing.
I'm
So-
sending it to you now. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? I think this is sort of, Darren and Jacques and I can follow up and sort of figure out what next steps are, but this was really helpful. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on? Darren, you're mute. Darren, are you talking to us?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
I'll following this, let me reach out to Alex and the team and just get a better sense of a timeline, and then try to build out a tentative timeline to share with this committee, and to note the incoming state board members, maybe putting together a statement of work, just putting that together, even like we could put that together before the start of the new fiscal year, but just have that set so that when we're in the new fiscal year, at least that'll be ready to go. It was reviewed by these members and this committee, and then moving on from there. I think so. Just to reiterate, I'll build out a timeline and then kind of work with the committee to then build out a statement of work before that.
Yeah. And I think also digging up so Darren dug up the TNTP. It is TNTP. Okay.
Mhm.
That study for me, and I will forward that. But if you could also dig up there was a well-rounded education study that wasn't as evolved, but there was something on paper. So maybe we should look at that as well. And then, yes, to everything else you said. And
This
Oh.
are you saying there was a well-rounded memo or something produced or published by the state board, or is this something separate?
so the well-rounded education committee that it used to exist
Mm-hmm.
was working on two projects.
Mm-hmm.
One was the standards project that Zach was leading, and we got further along with that, and we actually, engaged TNTP, and they were ready to go. And the other one was the well-rounded education research, which we hadn't yet found a vendor for. And there was a proposal, I believe.
I think that's the one I sent you.
No, that's the
That
TNTP.
wasn't?
That was standards. So I think there is another one. If you
Okay.
can't find it, then maybe not. So we can.
I'll dig around.
And then the other question is just, I think that what based on what I'm hearing, we maybe don't want to hear from the researchers right now, because it might just, I think we should look at their research. So I'll share that, but I don't think we need to hear from them. Just closing, I need to jump off, but I would just say, for the last thing, the park, alternatives to park, if we could read the things that I sent, and then my question is, does it make sense actually to have them visit, either, come and talk to us as a panel to our committee or to the board, the whole board, to propose that to the whole board. So either starting with this idea of the through year assessment, which now several states are starting to use, but Georgia, I think, is the furthest along with it. And just hearing from them what's been, working, what are the challenges, and just understanding that, and or, calling on states that are doing multiple different things, and I'm not sure if there are a lot of other things that would be realistic for DC, but I would suggest just starting with the through year example, since so many states are starting to try it. Is that a hand, Ruth,
Yeah,
for this? Yeah.
very quick. I like the idea of focusing on the through year. I think there's a huge amount of interest in that. I would really, really urge that if we had 2 or 3 speakers on that on a panel, maybe 2, that we also have one person that talks about this content issue. And I think Louisiana is the one state, but I think there's others that have moved forward on that to sort of figure out a way that the assessment, it can be a through assessment, right? It's an idea, not an assessment system, to make sure that part of what you're incentivizing in schools is the learning of content.
Yeah.
And that when you're assessing the reading score, you're getting a good reading score because it's on content that kids know. And I just think if we could join them, that would be terrific.
Yeah, I think the idea here is to address the problems, right? And so the through year, it addresses some of the issues, like, that too much time is spent on the state test. And that I think Representative O'Leary brings this up a lot about, there should be a beginning of the year and end of year assessment. And it addresses those things. But, there are challenges, as some of the texts that I shared, bring up, and that will be true of any shift, I think. So we just need to be aware of that. So I would suggest we invite folks, and the only question is it to our committee, or is it something we propose, see if there's interest for the whole board? And then the other question is, I remember that OSSI got upset when we invited folks from other states to talk about something. Now I can't remember what it was, but we may want to, this is maybe to you, President Sutter, like, is there anything we need to do ahead of in that kind of invitation to make sure that we're not stepping on toes?
Yeah, so I know that was under a prior administration, so I don't know whether it would sit this way, but I'm happy to ask that question on Monday as well. I do think one thing I want us to be mindful of is that OSSI is in the middle of an active, I think, and Evan Kramer put it this way on Wednesday night, an active RFP process. So underway already is a selection for who will do the assessment in 2023. And I don't think we have the chance to influence that process because they're already in consideration. I think the question is, I don't know how long that contract is for, whether it's a 3-year contract, a 5-year contract, or something shorter or longer. And I think, I don't know what the impact of that might be in terms of, like, if they've got a vendor already for another 3-year contract, this research and panel will be helpful to informing further conversations, but may not affect things in the short term. So I just hope that we are mindful of that, given where OSSI is in the process right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, that this is sort of a long-term, or taking a long view, and thinking about alternatives that are more alternative, which we know take a lot of time.
Yeah. So I will add that though to my list for Monday to ask, as we think about approaching a panel for this, whether it be at the committee or something broader, what, if any, information does OSSI want from us about how we're approaching invitations on this issue?
Okay. Is that another hand, Ruth, or is that?
No, I'm just sorry.
That's no worries. Okay, I think that was it. Okay, I'm just reading your text. Okay, great. So I think that's it, unless there's anything else folks wanted to bring up or anything that wasn't on the agenda. Are we good? Okay, all right. Thank you for sticking with us, everybody, and if you're out there. And have a great weekend, everybody. And thank you for a productive meeting. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.